Awesome. All right, guys. So I'm gonna get into this. As I mentioned, this is the first in-depth Visto PNP live class. So I'm going to be running live classes about 3 times a week. The first one happened on Sunday. We talked about 4 ways to increase your CRS score. And what we're building at Visto is a platform to help more people get through the express entry process. Obviously, a big part of express entry is a lot of people don't have a high enough score. And one of the ways that probably is very confusing for a lot of people, even myself as a Canadian immigration lawyer, are the PNP programs. So what I'm going to do is probably pick one or two each week, and we're going to go in depth into one or two PNP programs that work well for tech workers, and hopefully these will give you some other options that you can consider. So I'm going to jump in, probably spend around 15-20 minutes talking about the PNPs, and then I'll do a Q&A at the end as well. So if you have any questions, anything I missed, doesn't have to be about this PNP, right? If you have any other questions about finding a job or express entry, feel free to do that as well. Quickly, before I get started, if you are watching this replay and you're not already in the Visto community, check us out, visto.ai. Our platform is free to join. So the first PNP we're going to talk about in our live series is Saskatchewan. And specifically, just to clarify, each province or territory has their own PNPs, but they have multiple streams, right? So each province can have multiple streams for different types of workers, different types of employees, and anything like that. In this case, I went through Saskatchewan and found probably the two most applicable for tech workers, which in this case are the occupation in demand and express entry occupation streams. So you can see right here, I'm going to have the screens up so you can kind of follow along as well as listen to me if you so choose. The occupations in demand, OID, and express entry subcategories are for individuals who have education and work experience in high school and in-demand occupations. So first, we're going to go through and make sure you meet the general requirements for both, and then I'm going to go through each one really quickly. Their requirements do overlap a lot, so we'll be able to take a look at both pretty quickly and then go through some of the important details on eligibility and stuff like that. So the most important part here is so Visto does primarily focus on helping tech workers, and one of the main reasons is it makes it easier to help with these PNPs if we know exactly, if we know you're in the tech realm. So for example, one of the requirements is that you're in a NOC A, B, or 0 occupation. If you are a tech worker, software engineer, software developer, data scientist, something like that, then you will fall under the NOC A, B, or 0. What you want to do, though, is definitely, if you don't already, determine what your NOC code is. Now, this link and all these pages that I'm going to show you, I will provide links to in the description of this video. I'm also going to compile it into a blog post. But what you can do is you can click this link here, and there's instructions on how to find your NOC code. The easiest way is you can start typing your job title, and it'll bring up suggestions. I'm going to throw this link quickly in the chat right now, just so we have it on record. Sweta, thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. And that will help you figure out what your NOC code is, just to double check that you fall under NOC A, B, or 0. Then you're going to want to make sure that you're not on the excluded occupation list. So the way these two PNP programs work is if you're under a NOC O, A, or B, and you're not on this excluded list, then you meet the occupation requirements. So here's the occupations list for the express entry and occupations in demand categories. What I recommend is going through this list on your own. But what I noticed when scrolling through it is that none of the tech occupations are on there. So for example, 2172, 2171, 2173, 2174, 2175, which are the big tech occupations that I mentioned earlier, software engineer, developer, web programmer, data scientist. None of them are on here, which means that you're good, right? You don't want to be on this. This is the excluded list. So that means that the NOC codes on this list are not eligible to apply under this PNP, so we do not want to be on this list. Again, double check what your NOC code is, make sure you're not on the list. But you can see here there's no 217s, there's none of that software tech stuff. Now there are some engineers, right? You can see petroleum engineer, aerospace engineer, landscape architect. So again, you do want to check through this list and make sure that you are not on it in order to move forward. Now, we're going to get to this part later on, but that's because it doesn't make as much sense to cover it now. We can cover it for both. What's next is that one of the annoying parts that I noticed when going through is that Saskatchewan does require you to prove that you're part of a regulated occupation. So depending on which province you immigrate to, and depending on your NOC code, you may or may not need to show a certain license or status to fall under a certain occupation. So for example, if you're a lawyer and you are immigrating into Canada, you have to get the license to practice law in that specific province. Now, some provinces in Canada don't require anything for tech workers. You don't have to prove in any way other than prior work experience and perhaps education that you have the qualifications to be a software engineer. Unfortunately, that's not the case in Saskatchewan, and that you are going to have to prove, where is it? Here it is. So there are professional requirements for certain occupations in order to meet the requirements of the either occupations in demand or express entry subcategories. So I'm going to go through this quickly. Now keep in mind, this is upon the Saskatchewan request for additional documentation, but it could also delay your application if you don't provide it up front, right? So again, I'm going to post this link because this is an important one in the Facebook chat so we all have the record of it. But based on your NOC code, you're going to want to go through this page and figure out what the professional requirements are for proving it. So I'm going to go to some tech ones really quickly. So for example, here's software engineers. It says please go to page 5. Page 5 is where most of the tech worker ones are. So you can see here 2173, 2174, and 2175. Those are the big tech NOC codes, right? Software designers, computer programmers, web designers. You're going to have to show one of these 3 memberships. So a candidate membership as an associate information technology professional, or info systems professional, or infotech certified professional. All you have to do is go to these websites. The requirements actually aren't too demanding. So they do require that you meet certain education requirements, and some of them do require that you pass an ethics exam. But for the most part, it seems like a formality where you have to prove your education, maybe some work experience, maybe take an ethics exam, and of course pay them a fee, and you get the membership in order to meet the requirements. So it says here too, you must have completed a minimum 3-year program in computer science, infotechnology, computer science systems, or a related discipline in integrated multimedia or computing science. So you have to make sure you have the right degree, and then you're going to have to apply and get one of these memberships in order to qualify for Saskatchewan. So again, check the link. This is, once you make sure that you know your NOC code, you want to find the one that matches, right? You might not fall under those 3, but I put the link in the video here below, and so you can basically look up by NOC code if there are any requirements, right? You might fall under a NOC code that doesn't require one, in which case, congratulations, you're pretty lucky. So that's it for the beginning part. Now we're going to go into the specific requirements for each program, right? So there's the express entry program, and then there's the occupation in demand program. Now, luckily, most of the eligibility criteria are almost the exact same. So I'm going to go through these quickly, and we can talk if you have any questions or any more detail. But you'll see here, this subcategory is for skilled workers who want to live and work in Saskatchewan. So I should say that you should plan to live in Saskatchewan if you're planning on applying through the Saskatchewan PNP. you're already in the Express Entry pool. So you've created a profile and submitted it to the Express Entry pool, and you meet the subcategory criteria, which can change at any time. So keep in mind, if you're watching this video after the fact, you're going to want to double check these links to make sure that nothing has changed. What I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to copy and paste this link into the chat. So I'm going to come back and answer all these questions, just because while I'm in the flow of things here, I'm going to go through each program, and then I'll go back through the chat and answer the questions at the end. So to be eligible for this subcategory, there's a $350 application fee to pay online. Now keep in mind, that's for if you're invited to apply. And I'm going to go through that process once we go through the eligibility. But for either of these, there's a $350 Canadian application fee. So you may qualify for the subcategory if you live outside Canada or have proof of legal status in Canada. So maybe you're here on a work permit or a study permit and are not a refugee claimant. So if you're a refugee in Canada, you won't be eligible. Now, here's probably one of the most important parts. You have to score a minimum of 60 points out of 100 on their assessment grid. So if you know anything about Express Entry, you know about point systems. Saskatchewan has their own point system. And we're going to go into that in just a minute because this does apply to both programs, so we'll cover them both together. Minimum CLB 4 on the language test. Now, if you're a tech worker and you want to go through Express Entry, you're going to need a CLB 7, most likely anyways, so getting a 4 hopefully won't be too difficult. Have completed a post-secondary education training or apprenticeship of at least 1 year in length. So keep in mind that you're going to need a degree of more than a year. Again, you're going to need an ECA. If your degree is from outside of Canada, you're going to need an ECA showing that. But of course, if you're going through Express Entry, you will have needed an ECA anyways. So some of this stuff is also the exact same as the Express Entry requirements anyways. You have experience in an occupation that is highly skilled, not on the excluded occupation list. So we already went over that. And the minimum required work experience for skilled professionals, so that's tech workers that are not tradespeople, 1 year in the past 10 years. So you need 1 year of work experience in the high-skilled occupation, the NOC code that you're going under. If you're in Canada, 1 year work experience in the past 3 years. So here it says, and this is very important, your work experience must be in the field of your completed post-secondary education, training, or apprenticeship. It must be comparable to the Canadian education system of at least 1 year in length. So again, you can't choose an NOC code 2173 as a software engineer and then have work experience as a restaurant manager, right? They have to be, the work experience has to align with the NOC code you're applying under as well as the education too. So keep that in mind. Here, again, it mentions you may be required to provide proof of professional status or eligibility. So again, that's what I talked about earlier. Make sure to check your NOC code and go into this document to find the required proof. You're likely going to have to get some sort of membership for one of these, one of those associations. And have proof of settlement funds. So again, that's in line with Express Entry. You need at least $12,600 Canadian in terms of being able to support yourself through Express Entry and a settlement plan. So again, you're going to want to have proof that you're interested and willing and able to move to Saskatchewan. And so what you have to do for actually both is submit an expression of interest. So you're actually submitting an application or creating a profile similar to Express Entry. I'll go into more detail after I go through the second stream because they're very similar in that regards. Who can't apply? So I'm really quickly going to go through this. Again, if you're a refugee claimant in Canada, you cannot apply. And this stream, the Express Entry stream, is only for those who've already submitted a profile to Express Entry. So if you haven't submitted an Express Entry profile, you can't go through this stream. You may not be eligible if you didn't submit all the documentation that Saskatchewan asks for. So again, make sure you're filling everything out accurately, providing everything that they want. You are unable to prove that you intend to live and work in Saskatchewan. or you've misrepresented yourselves in the application, which you should never do. We're going to go over the assessment rating in a second to figure out your points, and then also how to apply. So let's go to the second stream. So this is the second option. So this is primarily if you meet all those requirements, but you are, for whatever reason, not in the express entry pool. Maybe you're not eligible yet, but you are in an occupation in demand, then this could be the better fit for you. So again, this subcategory is for skilled workers who don't have a job offer but are highly skilled in an in-demand occupation, and you meet the criteria. So you're going to see through the criteria below, it's very similar to the one we just went over, so that's why I wanted to cover the two of these together. Again, it's a $350 application fee, and keep in mind that the criteria can change at any time. So I'm going to put this link in the chat as well, so we have it for our records. So you'll find it in the chat below. And you're going to see it's pretty much identical at this point. So 60 points out of 100. We're going to go through this assessment grid in just 1 minute. Minimum CLB4, again, you're going to need borderline, definitely more than a CLB4 if you want to go through express entry anyways. Post-secondary education of at least 1 year in length, again, that's the exact same. Outside of Canada, you're going to want an ECA, again, same stuff mentioned. Experience in an occupation that is high skilled and not on the excluded list. Again, 1 year experience in the last 10 years, so pretty much identical. Must be in the same as your education, so your work experience, again, has to match. Pretty much the exact same requirements for the most part in terms of the eligibility criteria. Again, you may be required to provide proof of professional status or eligibility, so check that link I mentioned before, and proof of settlement funds and settlement plans. Pretty much the exact same, almost word for word. Again, same fee. An international skilled worker is not, okay, so if you're a skilled worker, you would apply under a different stream. So there's if you do have a job offer in Canada, that's a different stream, but for these talks, I wanted to cover PNPs where you do not need a job offer. Again, who can't apply? Refugee claimants. You fail, exact same as before. You're going to have to prove that you have an intention to live in Saskatchewan, and the assessment rating. So that's the second program. As you can see, borderline exact same as the express entry. The only difference is that for whatever reason you haven't already created an express entry profile, or maybe you're not eligible for it yet, or don't have a high enough score, and so you took off your profile. So let's go into the points assessment grid, because if you're eligible for either of those, you're going to need a 60 out of 100. And you'll see that it's very similar to express entry. The point scale is a little bit different, but very similar in what they're looking for. So number one is education. So again, we're keeping in mind that you need a 60 or higher out of 100 just to be eligible. And then what I'll do is I'll take you through the scores that have been required lately in order to be invited to apply. But you can see here master's or doctorate, so a master's or a PhD or a Canadian equivalent is going to get you 23 points. Again, I'm going to post this link in the chat so we have everything that's nice and handy. The higher the degree, the better, right? Similar to the express entry CRS points calculator. Bachelor's degree or 3-year or more program gets you 20. Trade certification to journeyman status in Saskatchewan gets you 20. Again, Canadian equivalency diploma, 2 but less than 3 years anniversary. So the better education you have, the better chance. You're probably going to need at least like a bachelor's degree or higher to score high enough here. Skilled work experience must be relevant to the single occupation you've selected. So the NOC code that you're applying under, you're going to have to match the work experience. 1 year of work experience is 12 full months of work experience. So here it's pretty simple. In the 5-year period prior, do you have how many years of work experience? So 5 years, you're going to get 10 points. 4, you're going to get 8, 6, 4, 2. In the 6 to 10 year period prior, again, how many years of work experience? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, with the points going down for each one. Language ability. This is again where like a CLB 8 or a CLB 9 or higher is really going to help. So again, CLB 7, you're getting 18, 8 or higher, you're going to get 20. So ideally, you go for a CLB 8 or higher here to get a bunch of those points. Age, here you want to be between 22 and 34. Again, it's totally out of, age is out of your control, but just to give you an idea of the points, 18 to 21, you get 8. 22 to 34, you get 12. 35 to 45, you get 10. So that's a little bit different from express entry. So this could actually be a good option if you're in your 30s or later, because in express entry, every year over the age of 29, you're losing 5 CRS points. Here, even if you're within 35 to 45, you're getting the second most points possible. So that could be promising. So you're getting a maximum of 70 out of your age, language, work experience, and education. And then you're going to see here that the last 30 points are for connections to Saskatchewan. So if you have an offer from a Saskatchewan employer, that's 30 points, which is really big. If you have a close family relative in Saskatchewan, that's 20 points. So it could be parent, sibling, grandparent, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, family members, stuff like that. If you have past work experience in Saskatchewan, you get 5 points. If you have past study experience in Saskatchewan, you get 5 points. So you can get a maximum of 30 right there. But what that means, unfortunately, is if you have no connection to Saskatchewan, you can max out at 70, right? You can't get higher than a 70, which is okay, because as you're about to see, you don't need 70 or higher, but it will be tough unless you can kind of max out on the other stuff. So the maximum is 100. You need at least a 60 to be eligible. So if you have no connection whatsoever to Saskatchewan, then you're really going to need, I'd say, like at least a bachelor's degree with at least 3 to 4 years of work experience, right, in order to max on every other point, as well as the language stuff, which is super important for express entry and for Saskatchewan. This we already went over the requirements. So the last thing I'm going to discuss quickly before I go into a few details on the scores that have been invited to apply is actually how to go through the application process. And so basically what you have to do is, it's similar to express entry in the sense that you have to create, in this case it's called an expression of interest profile. So in express entry, it's just an express entry profile. You submit it, and if you have a high enough score, you get invited to apply. Here you create what's called an expression of interest profile. You can see right here. And you answer some questions, give them some information. They're going to give you a final score, and then your profile will be submitted. If you have a high enough score, you'll be invited to apply, and that's when they'll show you the documents that are required, and everything else you need to submit. That's when you'll need to pay the fee as well. You don't have to pay the fee up front. So the last two details I'm going to go over are, what are the scores that have been invited to apply, how often is the draw done, and the processing times. So you can check here, again, another link. I'll put it in the Facebook group. Tesh, awesome. I'm going to get to your question at the very end. I appreciate you guys commenting and questioning. I will get to all your questions at the end. So here, the last draw you can see was November 28th. Today is December the 3rd. So they did an express entry draw and an occupations and demand draw on the 28th of November. The lowest ranked score was a 69. So you need at least a 60 to be eligible, but they only invited people with a 69 or higher. And so that makes it even more crucial that if you have no connection to Saskatchewan, you're going to need, you're going to have to meet pretty much all the other requirements pretty well, right? Because you can only afford to lose 1 point. So you're going to need a CLB 8 or higher. You're going to need 5 years of work experience. You're going to need like a master's or a PhD or something like that. You can see all the NOC codes that they invited to apply. So there's 2172, 2174 was in there. And then occupations and demand, there was 2172, 2174. So they're looking more at 2172 and 2174 as opposed to some of the other ones. I guess there aren't that many 2173s or 2175s applying. But you can see here, November 12th was another draw for both express entry and in demand. Again, the min score was a 69. October 31st, it was a 68 for both of them. So you can see it's about twice a month, right? They're doing about 2 per month, and with the scores in the high 60s, October 24th. Oh, they did about 4 invites actually in October. 67 was a required score on October 17th. So you're going to need a score in the high 60s, is what it looks like from recent draws, and they did a whole bunch in October. So that's a pretty good sign. Although they only did 2 in November, and we'll see. Usually at the end of the year, things quiet down a little bit because more people are taking time off with the holidays and stuff like that. And so processing isn't as quick, so they're probably not doing as many draws. But hopefully in January as well, that will pick up. The last thing I want to go into some detail in is the processing times. So as you can see here, the occupation and demand takes 27 weeks to process, so it's not short, right? That's about 6 months. However, if you do have a connection to Saskatchewan or you do have a high enough score, but you're struggling with express entry, that's still worth it for the wait, right? Because otherwise you might not have another chance in order to get a high enough score in express entry. So especially if you're in your 30s or 40s and you have a connection to Saskatchewan, even just a relative, then this could be a really good option. Unfortunately, express entry, it's a 41-week processing time, which is long. But again, if you're in the express entry pool and you're not going to have enough points otherwise, it could still be an opportunity for you. If you have an employment offer in Saskatchewan, it's 4 weeks, so there's the bonus there. But again, I like to focus on the situations where you don't actually have a job offer and what you can do. So that's it. A little bit longer than I expected here. It's 10 o'clock, so we've been for about 25 minutes, but there were a lot of details to go over. Hopefully that answered most of your questions about the Saskatchewan PNP streams that could be good options for you. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a Q&A, so I'll take a check through the Facebook chat. Again, I'll quickly mention, if you're watching this replay, you're not a member at Visto, make sure to go to visto.ai and sign up. It's free to join. I'll be focusing on 1 or 2 PNP programs a week, doing a live video like this on Facebook. And so if you're not in the group, you can't tune in live, so hope to see you there. I'm going to go through now and check the questions. Again, thanks to everyone who tuned in live.